Hello, hey peers. Here I am recording from my house this time. Let's take a look at our vocab words. Number one is Mohammed. I'll give you a lot of information here. So, Mohammed is known as the messenger and the final prophet in Islam. Known as the final prophet. Now, Mohammed was a man who heard a revelation from God. It came to him from the angel Gabriel. Angel Gabriel was speaking through God, and what Muslims believe is that Muhammad heard the true word from God and gave all these revelations to Muhammad over a series of time. Muhammad then took these revelations, they didn't come in the same day, they came over a series of days, and he then spoke them to his followers, who wrote them down in the book called the Quran. The Quran is the holy book for Muslims. So, Muhammad was from the city of Mecca. The city of Mecca is one of our words. It's number 3 on our list. So if you want to first put Mecca, it's the most holy city in Islam. It's where the Prophet Muhammad is from. And it's significant for being the starting point of Islam. So, Muhammad was from Mecca. But after he had these revelations, he kept talking about them. Now, he was a very successful merchant, a very successful salesperson. And then when he heard these revelations, he kept talking about it. People told him to stop. Because in the city of Mecca, most people were polytheistic. They believed in more than one God. In fact, many of them made a good business off selling idols of these gods. And they sold them in an area that today we call the Kaaba, which is a big black box, and I'll show that in a little bit here. So when Muhammad kept talking about no, there's only one God, these idols have to be not worshipped, and you can't worship other gods, they didn't like him at all because it's bad for business. And eventually they plotted to kill him. So Muhammad left for another city called Medina. And he left for Medina, and there he was able to get a number of followers with him. Him and his wife Hadisha were able to get a number of followers in the city of Medina, and they were eventually from Medina able to come back to the city of Mecca and defeat the people who were trying to kill Muhammad and take over the city of Mecca. Now, if we look here, you see the structure here, these are all people around it. You see this black box, it's called the Kaaba. It is the most holy site in Islam in the city of Mecca. So, our next word is Hajj. So let's begin with our next word called the Hajj. The Hajj is originally when Muhammad and his followers came back to the city of Mecca from Medina. They went from Medina to Mecca, and they were able to defeat the armies that were going against Muhammad. Now, when this happened, they were able to take over the city of Mecca, and this is called, symbolizes the Hajj. Now, the Hajj today is for Muslims. It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam, which we'll get to in a bit. And it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam that every Muslim is supposed to go on a Hajj or go to Mecca for prayer once in their life if they can afford it. So it's a symbol of Muhammad's journey to Mecca. So this is a very sacred journey for Muslims to take at one point in their life if they can. It's also symbolic because all Muslims unite in prayer together there. And also Muslims, when they pray, they're supposed to pray towards Mecca. Let's get to our next one. Let's skip one. Let's go to number 5, the 5 pillars of Islam. So there you see them right over there in the 5 pillars of Islam. And these are basically like the 5 rules that Muslims are supposed to follow. Apologize if I mispronounce these. There's the Shahada, which is the sincerely reciting the Muslim profession of faith and believing that there's one God and that God's name is Allah. There's Salat, which is performing ritual prayers, basically praying 5 times a day. Zakat, which is praying alms or charity or giving to the poor. Sawm, which is fasting during the month of Ramadan. And Hajj, which is a pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim is supposed to do once in their life if they can afford it. And those are the 5 pillars of Islam. There's a caliphate, and I'm just going to give you this definition here real quick. Caliphate is an Islamic state or Islamic empire. It is led by a caliph, who is a political and religious leader who is a successor to the Islamic prophet Muhammad, and the power is supposed to be absolute with the person. So caliphates would be land that would be under control of a caliph, who's a religious leader who is seen as being the successor of Muhammad. Now there were caliphates. The first one would be the Umayyad Caliphate, and then the Abbasid Caliphate. After that, we'll talk about. This here would be a map of the approximate land that was taken by the Abbasid Caliphate. You notice a lot of North Africa's in there. Spain. Spain was ruled by Muslims for centuries, especially during the post-classical era, all the way into Arabia, to the former Persian Empire up in here as well. And again, a caliphate is basically just land that is under rule of a caliph, who is seen as being a successor to Muhammad, both a religious leader and a political leader as well. Now today you might hear about ISIS or ISIL, that they're trying to start a caliphate in Syria and Iraq, but any serious Muslim scholar, almost all the Muslim world rejects them, that they are any kind of successor to Muhammad. Almost every Muslim in the world rejects that and thinks that no, ISIS is not a successor of Muhammad. In this era, though, they were seen as legitimate successors of Muhammad. Lastly, the Islamic caliphates were also very significant because they advanced education and they advanced trade in the post-classical era. Muslims were very good merchants, following the tradition of Muhammad, who was a merchant as well. All right, next we're looking at this, and okay, so Muslim merchant communities. So if we look at Muslim merchant communities, these are these ones in green right here, and what I notice about them is they're all over the Indian Ocean trade route. Muslim merchant communities spread all over the Indian Ocean trade route and advanced trade and Islam to areas of East Africa, India, Southeast Asia. Wherever they went, they brought their language Arabic, which became one of the most dominant trade languages at this time. And they were known for spreading their culture, their religion, and especially trade goods all over the Indian Ocean trade, and an Islamic diaspora of them moving into new lands. We'll get to our next one right away, which is about the Chinese merchant communities. And the Chinese merchant communities are right here. Not as large as the Muslim merchant communities, but Chinese people who moved out of their homeland into Southeast Asia to advance trade and form new diasporic communities. Historically significant as they advanced trade, especially with Chinese goods and technologies, as they would move into the Indian Ocean trade basin. All right, Sogdian merchant communities. You can read up here Ben Friedman's is a pretty good definition. It says, if you're like me, you're probably thinking, what's a Sogdian? Well, think of them as Central Asian traders. They lived and worked in the heart of the Silk Road. They facilitated all the cross-cultural contacts in the Silk Road. When you think Silk Road, you're thinking of Sogdians trading in its major cities. They're Central Asian people. They're in between the Islamic caliphates and the Chinese dynasties, whether it's the Song or the Tang, and they are basically moving goods back and forth. They are all about trade. That is that group. To our next one, which is the Jewish merchant communities, who originally were from the land of Israel, located right here. And that some of them stayed in the Middle East and moved into new diasporic communities. The Jewish people were kicked out by the Romans during the Roman Empire. Many of them moved into Europe and formed trade merchant communities all over Europe, which did help Europe advance, and some in North Africa as well. And they were very involved in the trade, especially on the Mediterranean Sea, in the Mediterranean Sea trade, which was historically significant because it did link Europe to other trade routes and did help Europe advance. Next is Ibn Battuta, we'll be hearing more about later. Ibn Battuta was originally from Morocco. He was a North African Muslim who went on his Hajj first to Mecca. But then, once he finished his Hajj, he realized he wanted to travel more. And did he ever? He covered way more miles than Marco Polo. In fact, if you're swimming in the pool and playing that game, Marco Polo, Marco Polo, instead you should say, Ibn Battuta, Ibn Battuta, Ibn Battuta, because he traveled further. Anyway, so Ibn Battuta traveled all over the Muslim world and everywhere. Look at this little rock right here. So as he traveled, he wrote about all these different lands, which is awesome because he's such a good primary source of the post-classical era. And because he spoke Arabic, very historically significant because he shows if you spoke Arabic, how far you could go with that. And he was able to go all over Afro-Eurasia, West Africa, East Africa, over through the Silk Road, India, Southeast Asia, and wrote tons about all of these areas where he was able to go to. And so he wrote about them, and also very significant because he was an expert at Sharia and Islamic law at that time, which was being practiced over many different parts of these trade routes. So he was able to find work pretty much anywhere he went. So he was able to find work, he met numerous people, traded, got married numerous times, had kids along the way. It was kind of living a rock star life, really, to tell you the truth, as he was moving all over Dar al-Islam, which is the name basically of the Islamic world at this time, which was huge in the post-classical era. Post-classical era, and it's all about Muslims and Mongols. Well, that and camel saddles and stirrups. All right, let's go to our next word. Now we see Marco Polo's travels, and there it shows up there. Yeah, 1271, 1295. Marco Polo was from Venice originally, here up in Italy, and his dad and his uncle were traders who went all the way into China, and they came back, and when Marco was about 17, he went with them. They wanted to go by sea, but there was conflict going on, so they went by land and took the Silk Road all the way into China, which was then under Mongol rule, under the Yao dynasty and Kublai Khan. So, fun to say it that way. Anyway, so what happened was, he became basically an advisor to Kublai Khan at that time, and he told really good stories. Kublai Khan believed he always told him the truth. He had a gift of languages. So Marco Polo was given this cool gold tablet, and he was basically given free reign to go wherever he wanted to go in Kublai Khan's empire, which was freaking huge, China and much, much more. So he was able to travel around until eventually Kublai Khan started dying, and Marco Polo had to get out of there because other people didn't like him. So he took a ship out and headed back towards Venice. Unfortunately, Venice was involved in a war that time. Marco Polo was taken prisoner and thrown into a jail cell, where he eventually started telling his stories, and people were like, whoa, this is amazing what he's saying. And they wrote it down, and it spread all throughout Europe and told all these stories of, the Orient, the East, China, and the Mongols and everything, which then spread and really made people in Europe be more interested in what else was out there, especially with trade. That's the significance. Our next and last word, our next traveler, Xian Zhang. Xian Zhang was a traveler who went from China all the way into India, and he went there, and his goal was to get Buddhist writings and to bring them back. He took basically like a religious pilgrimage, went into India, collected all these Buddhist writings, and then was able to come back on his, we call it the journey to the West, and then he was able to come back into China and bring all these works back to the people of China and spread more about Buddhism with the original writings in China. And again, historically significant, shows how much Buddhism was ingrained into Chinese society. Bonus word, not in your sheet, champa rice. Write this one down, probably in Kahoot, and maybe a bonus question at some point. Champa rice was a rice that came from Vietnam. It was brought to China, and it grew really fast. So fast that it basically made people in China be able to live longer and have longer life expectancies because they had more food. Champa rice led to more food, people living longer in the post-classical age. Very important, people living longer. It's like a camel saddle, important thing. Champa rice made people live longer in post-classical China. Important.